Good morning, everyone. I have the best job in the world, I think. In my opinion, of course. And if you have a great job, you probably think your job is the best. But here is why I think my job is the best. I spend every day connecting people to mission opportunities. That's what I do for the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and I love every minute of it. So the video you saw about vividfaith.com, where you can go and find opportunities. Since I'm a member here, if you have any questions, you can always grab me after church. As of this morning, we have 8,203 people who have signed up just this year to go serve and share their faith in the world. We have so many eager people. The Holy Spirit is moving the hearts, telling people to go and serve. And so we have, the challenge we have is finding places for them to go. So Adventist mission is growing like we've never seen before. And to serve God comes with special blessings. Roy and I served as missionaries in Nepal. He was the eager missionary, I was the reluctant missionary. So Roy and I arrived in Nepal on a cold January morning, 2001. With us, we had 8 suitcases, 4 carry-on pieces, 2 children, and 1 very stressed dog that had been holding it in for 32 hours and really had to go. We arrived in that country in the middle of a civil war that had already been brewing for 2 or 3 years by then. There was an ongoing tension in the air. Peace talks were going nowhere, and the UN troops always seemed to be 2 steps behind and a few minutes too late to prevent a bomb. But all in all, it was a passive sort of war where both sides, the Maoists, at that time labeled as terrorists, and the Nepali army, played a game of chicken, daring the other one to make their first move. So, except for the curfews that seemed to happen almost every evening, and the spattering of a few bombs here and there, life was actually pretty normal. We got used to all of that, and we felt safe enough to live in this strange country that was now home to us. So we settled into a routine. Every morning before sunrise, a loud, obnoxious bird would squawk right outside my bedroom window, even before the sun came up, like clockwork, every morning. And a few minutes later, the loud squawking noise of the bird would be drowned out by an even louder, out-of-tune singing by Hindu priests down the cobblestone road at the temple by the mountain. So between the squawking bird and the out-of-tune singing, we had very early mornings. And this particular morning started out the same way. Squawking, annoying bird, annoying out-of-tune songs. And we had no idea that within a couple of hours, everything would change. We had no idea that that day was the start of a bloody battle. We had no idea that the first casualty of the war would be brought to our little Adventist hospital. It wasn't a soldier, it was just a young man standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. We didn't know that that week, piles of bodies would be right outside of Roy's office window. So many dying with not enough place to hold the bodies. That morning, I would have welcomed the squawking bird. I would have welcomed the priest singing. Instead, we heard screams of people in pain angry mobs yelling out slogans. And so I stood at my living room window and I saw it all. I looked past the green, bright green rice fields, and right at the edge of the rice field was a tall, 3-story, unplastered brick building, which was the headquarters of the terrorists, with a flag flying high. Around that brick building were pots of yellow mustard seeds. I remember it so clearly. And right there in front of the building, close enough from my living room, is the road that connects Nepal to Tibet. And I saw it all that day, standing right there at my window. And my daughter, who was not tall enough to see, pulled a stool and stood next to me, and we saw it all. We saw the battle begin. Marching from east to west were the Maoist soldiers. They had machetes, homemade weapons, and a few guns. Marching the opposite direction, from west to east, was the Nepali army with bigger guns, army tanks, and a lot of soldiers. It was like I had my own reality show. I'm not one to take political sides, but I watched this motley crew of terrorists there, and I was impressed. They were a mixed bunch. There was some young, some old, some men, some women. Their weapons were nothing compared to the army. Their numbers were few compared to the army. They didn't have protective gear, and yet they fought so hard. They gave their fight all they had. They had absolutely no care in the world except for what they believed in. And as I watched that scene, I was impressed. I was impressed by the power of the human mind, the human heart and spirit, how that can have overcome any circumstances. And to me, I looked at that scene and it reminded me of 1 Samuel chapter 17, the battle between God's people and the Philistines, Goliath and David. And standing there, I was wondering, how would that story in 1 Samuel 17, how would it have turned out if God's people had the same energy and same conviction as this motley crew of terrorists I was watching? If they had just fought with conviction, with faith, believing in what they stood for. But instead, we know that that's not what happened. They were there, scared of Goliath. Let us pray before we begin looking at this story. Heavenly Father, as we study the story of David and Goliath, help us to learn lessons from it that help us be better soldiers for you, better ambassadors, better missionaries, so that we can be at a point when we leave this sanctuary, at a point where we can say, God, use me, use my gifts, use my time, so that I can represent you the best I can. In Jesus' name, amen. So, 1 Samuel 17 says, the Philistines and the Israelites, they faced each other on opposite hills with a valley between them. And Goliath was intimidating them. He says, I defy the armies of Israel today. In verse 10, 1 Samuel 17, verse 10, I defy the armies of Israel today. Send me a man who will fight with me. When Saul and the Israelites heard this, they were terrified and deeply shaken. So in verse 16 we read, for 40 days, every morning and evening, the champion strutted in front of the Israelite army and dared them again. Here we have God's people, God's chosen people, cowering in fear and void of faith They were intimidated by the power and the strength of the opposition. They were forgetting how God had led them in the past, and they were assuming that the only outcome was loss and defeat. So they were camped there for 40 days and had done absolutely nothing. So God looks at his people, trained soldiers, well outfitted with weapons, good history of success, all the blessings, all the promises they could have. He looks at them and he shakes his head and he sends a young shepherd boy to replace an entire army. When the chosen, when the church, when the people pitch their tents and do nothing, God sends one person, one missionary to do what an entire group of trained men and women have not been able to do. You know, the first lesson we can learn from David is that we need to claim God's promise. Think of David as a shepherd boy, you know. He didn't go to any boot camp. He wasn't a soldier in training. He was just a young shepherd boy. And sheep are pretty low maintenance. You shear them once a year. Make sure the fence is well secured, otherwise, you know, they may escape. But other than that, sheep just eat and sit. You don't have to play fetch with them. You know, they're not like my needy cats who always need attention. No, you just leave them alone. So the life of a shepherd is actually pretty boring. A shepherd does nothing but watch the sheep. David could have been sitting there with his phone in hand, just whiling away the time, checking out YouTube, thinking of his next new invention, carving things out of whittling away. But no, we know that David spent his time as a shepherd standing on God's promises, sharpening his skills with his slingshot, memorizing scripture, looking at the desert around with him and saying, God, even in this desert, I partner with you. I choose to walk with you. We know this is true. We know that David claimed his promise, God's promises. We know that David partnered with God because we have the Psalms, so many of them, that pick on the metaphors of being a shepherd, that pick on his experiences as a shepherd boy, and then as a king, and then as a fallen sinner. We know that in all of it, David stayed connected to God. So similarly with us, it's in the little things, the small steps that prepare us for big impacts. Small steps. When we get a job that seems boring, there is something in there that's preparing us to make a big impact. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. For me, I had to wait 30 years to see why I did those boring things. But in the end, it is for God's glory. So number one is that we need to claim God's promise. Number two is we need to say yes to opportunities. The Bible tells us that David's father calls David and says, hey, your brothers are in the battlefield. They're sitting around 40 days now. They haven't done a thing, but maybe they're running low on food. So take some bread and cheese, go deliver it. So David, being the obedient sons, yes, bread, 10 loaves, says chapter 17, 10 loaves of bread. He takes some cheese and he's off. But Ellen White in Patriarchs and Prophets tells us an additional piece of information. Yes, David's father said, go deliver bread and cheese. But Ellen White adds that David had been directed by an angel to save his people. So, father gives a task, but God gives him a mission. Father tells David, take bread and cheese, and God says, while you're delivering that bread and cheese, save my people. David is on a family errand. God says, you're going on a rescue mission. Little things, big impact. Help a human, God's watching, and there is a big impact. Even today, the big God-appointed opportunities come wrapped up in small, everyday needs. Humanitarian aid turns into fertile ground where relationships are built, communities are knitted back together, and faith is shared. A good deed that you do may result in events that you will never know anything about. Small steps, big impact. Our church has so many projects that you can join. We have the one-to-one ministry, we've got the Urban Life Center in Baltimore, we've got Adventist Community Services, and if you're like me with a job that takes you traveling too much and long hours and you can't get involved in a project at church, that is no excuse, because every day has time to say yes to an opportunity. So, I'll give you a quick example. My life, as I say, is very busy, but what I do is I have alerts set on certain apps and sites online. You know these, like on Craigslist, you have people who say they're looking for a tricycle, or they're looking for this, or you see it on Facebook Marketplace, right? There is a section, wanted. I'm looking for a screwdriver, whatever it is. I have alerts, and if it's something I have that someone needs, I throw it in the back of my car. My husband always complains that it looks junky, but there are things in my car that I know people need, strangers need. All I have to do is text, and anyone can text, you know, not while you're driving, but you can text real quick and say, hey, you need a garden hose. I have a garden hose I can give. So if you always, like me, I always go by the Center Park Shopping Center, the cross of 108 and Phelps Lock Drive in Columbia. That's my street. So it's easy to say, okay, I'm going by there at 10, I'll be outside of Popeyes, I'll give you the garden hose. Complete strangers. But from those encounters with strangers, in my own small way, I have said yes to an opportunity. And from those I've developed connections and friendships. I don't know where God is going to take them, but I believe that if I say yes to the little things, God will make it something of value to his kingdom. So, claim his promises. And number 2, say yes to opportunities. The third is to take action with what you have. Now, we are very good at claiming promises. I know. By the time my little girl could say mommy and daddy, I was making sure she was memorizing scripture. We all do that, right? From kindergarten, you memorize scripture. We have notes in our Bible. We have magnets with Bible verses. We claim promises. We are very good at it, right? We say yes. We're very good at it. If there is a call here there's a disaster and there's a call, everyone says yes. We help in some way. We say, yes, I'll be a missionary. We say yes to a promotion. We say, yes, I'll join your church. We say yes to many things, many good things. But oftentimes, that's where we stop. Promises on one hand, yes on the other hand. You've already committed. So you have a promise, you have a commitment, but it stops there. Suddenly, the job you said yes to becomes only a paycheck. Suddenly, the yes you said to helping a project becomes only something we think about and put on our calendar. Look at the soldiers that day in that valley. The soldiers of Israel, Even King Saul, at one point or another, had claimed God's promises. They all had said, yes, let's go fight Goliath. Yes, let's keep our land. Yes, let's say yes to God. Yes, we know God is with us. They said yes, yes, yes. And yet, where were they? They were pitched in tents for 40 days, doing nothing but remembering Scripture and saying yes. It is not enough to read your Bible and be willing if you don't put those two in action. So when it came to actually crossing that line and facing Goliath, suddenly the risks were what they were in reality, huge risk. Suddenly they were there saying, no, I need a sure sign. Maybe God can step in and do the job. Maybe there would be a miracle. Maybe the earth would open up and swallow the giant. Maybe God will do something. Maybe someone else would do something. So like the soldiers, we sometimes claim promises. We say yes to our calling, but then we don't take the initiative to act or to take a risk. We can all be international service employees for the church without actually being missionaries. We can all be workers in some way without actually being God's ambassadors. We can all be church members without ever being disciples. So thousands stood in that valley, all soldiers, but none ready to fight. So what does God do? He chooses one young shepherd boy. You see, when God calls you, you are already prepared. You may not know it, but God sees the potential in you. He has taken note. Maybe he has an app or somewhere. He just takes notes. Check. Fylvia can do this. Fylvia can do this. Next list, yes, she's done it. Fylvia can do the other. Yes, she's done it. He pulls out the inventory of all the gifts and skills he has programmed you while you were in your mother's womb. And as you grow, he sees those being developed, and he says, check, she's using what I programmed her with. Check, she needs to work on the other thing a little bit more. Let me give her some opportunities so she can strengthen those gifts. See, God equips us, but he doesn't make us take action. And sometimes when God calls you, he doesn't give you all the details. Take David. The angel says, go. The angel didn't give him any instructions. There are characters in the Bible who are more fortunate. Take Gideon, for example. With Gideon, God gave him special instructions. How many men, how to figure out the good soldiers from the bad soldiers, how many trumpets, how many times to blow the trumpets, or when to blow the trumpets. Personally, a little bit of an overkill, I think. But God gave Gideon all these specific instructions. With Moses, God gave specific instruction. Hit the rock once, hold it over the water, manna from heaven, very specific instructions. But with David, all he got was this feeling, this command to go. And so what David does is, he claims God's promise, he says yes, and third, he takes action. He bends down and picks up 5 stones. By the brook, picking up 5 stones, David was probably at that time saying, oh, I'm so grateful for the long, boring days of being a shepherd. I got to practice my slings, and I got really good at it. He sharpened his skills to such perfection that when he was confronted with Goliath, how many stones did it take? 1. But remember, what I always find interesting is I bet because of his excellent marksmanship, I'm sure when he stood there and he saw Goliath, kind of calculated where he was and how far he had to get that stone right to hit Goliath at the right place. I bet because of his skills, because of his practice, because of his confidence, because he had been walking with God, because it was an angel who told him to go, because he knew that he was ordained for that mission task right then. Because of all those things, David probably knew that he needed only one small, smooth stone. But does he pick one? He picks up 5. The Bible doesn't tell us why, but here's my version. This is why I think he took up 5 stones. David, I feel, he doesn't leave anything to chance. If he picked up 1 stone, I think it would have been his pride of his own skills that would have driven the story. Instead, when he picked up his 5 stones, I believe that David left his pride by the brook. When God calls you, no matter how good you are, before you pick up your stones, set aside your pride. So God, he sets aside his pride and he says, you know, what if I need more than 1 stone? Maybe I should have a plan B. Maybe I should do everything I can so that the assignment that God has given me doesn't fail. So when he sets his pride aside, he doesn't focus on his own skill, but on the task at hand, on the mission he is sent out to do. So, where is your slingshot today? I hope it is right by you, right next to your Bible right here. And how many stones do you have? Let's get back to the slingshot. Where is your slingshot? Do you use it every day so you're really, really good? So that you're really, really ready when God calls you to use your slingshot? Or is your slingshot gathering dust in a cupboard that no one ever uses? My challenge today to you is, if you have been using your slingshot and you have your stones ready, invite the Holy Spirit to open your eyes every day to find that one opportunity. Don't wait for a 5-year assignment or a building trip that takes you away from home for a week. When God calls us to be a disciple, it's to be a disciple, to be a missionary every day. In the little things. It's great to have trips, an assignment to Nepal like we did. It's great to go on a building trip, but those are sporadic and far in between. We need more practice with our slingshot. We need to use it every day. 1 Peter 4:10 says, God has given each of you, not some of you, God has given each of you special abilities. So, be sure to use them to help each other, passing on to others God's many kinds of blessings. God has given each of us special abilities. Let's not keep them in the cupboard gathering dust. So back to that morning when the war began and I was at my living room window. That day was a horrendous, horrible day as bodies were being brought in. And quickly, things escalated. Quickly, things got worse. Embassies began to shut down, and then the American embassy contacted all the Americans there, invited us to an emergency meeting. It was so many of us that we had to meet at the ambassador's front lawn. We met, and they announced to us that the embassy was shutting down. Everybody needs to be evacuated right away. Americans leave. And so people started packing, leaving. We still had time in our 6-year commitment. And I truly don't remember praying about it. I just remember Roy saying, I'm staying. So he was convicted to stay, and so the children and I decided to stay with him. And it ended up being that the embassy was closed. I meant to Google this because I can't remember. I think it was 10 months, was it? Longer? Between 10 months to a year, the embassy had closed. There was no official agency to help us, even if we wanted to leave at that point. We were the only Americans left in the country. Everyone, all the NGOs had closed, but we stayed. Only because we felt called, Roy felt called to stay, and we all followed. To be fair to him, he did tell me to take the kids and come back to the US, but we stayed. And the year that followed was very, very difficult, very, very scary. Everything from ability to get food to safety to just walk down the street was difficult. Everything was difficult. But I can tell you that during that time, I felt the assurance and presence of God like I had never, ever felt until that time. And since that time till now, 20-some years later, I still have never felt God's presence as much as I did during the time when we were the only Americans left in the middle of a civil war in Nepal. As things get more and more difficult in life, as things get more and more challenging, the more you feel God's presence. When you claim His promise, when you say yes to opportunities, and when you take action. So when you hear stories like mine, if you're sitting there and thinking, oh wow, what a story she has. My life's so boring, I don't do anything. I can't even get on a plane without freaking out. You know, well, what am I going to do? Or I don't have the money, or I've never had the opportunity. How can I be a missionary? We are all called to serve, to participate in the Gospel Commission, to share Jesus. But we are not all called to uproot our families, to get on a plane, to live in a strange place. My boss, Pastor Urton Culler, who is the executive secretary for the World Church, he often says this. He says, you can support missions with your hands, with your pockets, or on your knees. You can support mission service, mission projects with your hands and your feet by going there or just doing something, or with your pockets by supporting them with finances and resources, or on your knees. 3 ways to serve. There is no excuse not to serve. So today, whether you feel called to use your hands, whether you're called to use what's in your pockets, whether you're called to get on your knees, regardless, small steps make a big impact for God. Claim His promises, say yes to opportunities, but never stop there. Take action with what you have. That slingshot, dust it off, pick up your stones, be ready, because when God calls you, the adventure is more than you can ever imagine. And that is what it is to be an Adventist who practices a lifestyle of service. And no matter what the challenge, like David, let's look at the challenge head on. Claim God's promise and say, hey, challenge, hey, difficult time, hey, tough life, I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts.